desert didn't forgive mistakes. By the summer of 1891, the land stretching between Santa Fe and the Colorado line was a graveyard of bones. Cattle skulls, wagon wheels, men and women who thought they could outwalk the sun but learned too late that thirst was stronger than hope. On that afternoon, heat shimmered across the mesa until the horizon bent and wavered like a living thing. The sand was pale, cracked open in wide mouths, waiting to swallow whoever strayed too far from the trails. The wind carried nothing but dust, hot and dry as a blacksmith's breath. It was along that empty stretch that Jonah Hale rode alone. A drifter by trade, a man without a tether to any town, he carried little more than his saddle, a Bible he didn't read, and a canteen that was already too light in his hand. His horse's ribs showed through its hide, and Jonah knew, if he didn't find water soon, both of them might be added to the desert's collection. But then, something broke the sameness of the landscape. At first, he thought it was just another mirage, the desert's cruel trick of showing water or shapes where there were none, but as he narrowed his eyes against the glare, he saw her. A figure sprawled on the sand. Jonah slid off his horse, boots sinking into the burning grit. Up close, it was no mirage. It was a woman, her dress torn to rags, her skin red and cracked from the sun. Her lips were split, her face caked in dust. She lay on her back, chest rising so faintly he thought she might already be gone. He knelt beside her. Her eyes flickered open at the shadow his body cast across her. They were pale, glassy, like water at the bottom of a well. Her voice was no more than a rasp. Please. Her throat worked as if the word itself hurt. Water. Jonah froze. His canteen weighed against his hip. He barely had enough left for himself, and the desert was merciless to fools who gave it away. A man traveling alone didn't make it by kindness. And yet, he could not stand and watch her die. Jonah unhooked the canteen, unscrewed the cap, and pressed it gently to her lips. She drank greedily at first, then choked, and he had to steady her, lifting her head into the crook of his arm so the water slid down easier. He forced himself to pull the canteen away before it was empty. Her eyes closed again, but her breathing came stronger. Jonah looked out at the vast, blazing horizon. Whoever had left her here had meant for her to die, and by giving her that water, he'd bound himself to her fate. Because now she wasn't just a stranger in the desert. She was his responsibility. Jonah's horse shifted restlessly, snorting at the heat. The animal wanted to keep moving to find shade or a stream bed, but there was none to be found. Jonah looked down at the woman again. She was light as death itself when he slid his arms beneath her, but the desert made every step heavier. He lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder, strands of sun-bleached hair sticking to his sweat-soaked shirt. He walked back to the horse, whispering soft words the way a man does when he's not sure if he's talking to calm the animal, or himself. Easy, Buck. Easy, boy. She don't weigh near nothing. You can carry two. With effort, he hauled her up onto the saddle, settling her limp body against the horn. She sagged forward, and Jonah climbed up behind her, bracing her upright with one arm while guiding the reins with the other. The desert stretched endless before them. The air quivered with heat, the ground burning through Jonah's boots. He tilted the brim of his hat low, scanning the horizon for anything, a line of scrub, a dry wash, a patch of shade where they could stop before the sun burned her to the bone. The woman stirred once, her lips twitching. Jonah leaned close to hear. They left me. Her words dissolved into the rattle of her breath. He didn't press her. Not yet. She needed strength more than answers, but the hung heavy in Jonah's mind. Left her. Someone had done this on purpose. He pulled the canteen free again, letting a few drops wet her lips. She swallowed weakly, then turned her face toward him, as though trying to see through the blur of heat and dust. "Why?" she whispered. Jonah didn't answer. He didn't know if she was asking why he stopped, why she'd been left behind, or why the desert itself seemed bent on swallowing the both of them. He just kept the horse moving, one plodding step at a time. By late afternoon, the sky burned orange and white. Jonah spotted the dark cut of rock to the north, a half-collapsed canyon wall with an overhang that might throw enough shade to matter. He steered Buck toward it, teeth gritted, every muscle screaming from holding the girl upright. When they reached the stone shelter, he slid her down, lowering her onto a patch of cool sand in the shadow of the rock. The temperature dropped just enough that the air didn't sear his lungs when he breathed. Jonah knelt beside her. Her skin was fever-hot beneath the grime, her cracked lips trembling with each shallow breath. He poured a thin stream of water into his hand and pressed it gently to her mouth. She licked at it instinctively, her throat working like a child's. That left less than a swallow in the canteen. Jonah stared at it, weighing the iron weight of survival against the softer pull in his chest. If he gave her the last of it and couldn't find water tomorrow, they'd both be bones on this sand. But if he kept it for himself, she wouldn't last the night. He closed the cap, slipping the canteen back to his belt. Not yet. Instead, he tore a strip from his shirt sleeve and soaked it with what little dampness clung at the bottom of his saddlebag. He dabbed the cloth across her face, washing away grit, cooling her temples. Her eyes flickered open. "Who are you?" "Just passing." "G through," Jonah muttered. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Drifter?" Jonah's brow furrowed. "How'd you end up out here?" Her throat worked, but the words came jagged, halting. "Men. Said I wasn't worth the water. Said slower than the rest. Left me when the wagon broke down." Her voice cracked on the last syllable, not from tears. There were none left in her, but from raw exhaustion. Jonah sat back on his heels, anger settling in his gut like hot lead. He'd seen it before, settlers driving hard across the desert, throwing over anything that slowed them down. A mule too weak, a chest too heavy, a child too sick, a woman too broken to walk. But hearing her say it, knowing someone had looked her in the eye and decided she wasn't worth a drink, that cut deeper than the desert sun. "You ain't alone now," Jonah said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Her gaze wavered on him, unfocused but searching, as if she was testing whether his voice could be trusted more than the empty promises of the men who'd left her. Then her eyes closed again, and she slipped into a restless half-sleep. Night came fast in the desert. The heat bled out of the sand until the air grew sharp and cold, biting through Jonah's thin shirt. He built a small fire from scrub and sagebrush, careful to shield the flame with stones so its light wouldn't carry too far. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their cries carrying on the wind. Jonah sat with his back to the rock, the woman resting near the fire, wrapped in his coat. He watched her chest rise and fall, slow but steady. He should have been thinking of his own survival, mapping the stars, planning where to ride come dawn, calculating how many miles his horse could carry without water. But instead, all he could see was her face, raw from the sun, her lips cracked open on the word, "Please." It had been years since Jonah had let himself care about anything but getting through one more day. But this woman, left in the sand to die, abandoned like trash, stirred something he thought long dead. He rubbed his thumb along the rim of the empty canteen. Tomorrow, they'd need to find water, or it would all be for nothing. He'd have to push his horse hard, scan the land for gullies, cactus, anything with life left in it. And if he failed, then his last drop of water would be hers, not his. Jonah looked up at the sky. The stars burned cold and bright, millions of them, sharp as shards of glass. The desert didn't forgive mistakes. But Jonah Hale had already chosen his. The desert woke before the sun. A thin wind dragged across the sand, rattling dry brush like bones. Jonah stirred the last ember of the fire with a stick, letting the smoke curl upward before stamping it out with his boot. He checked the woman. Her skin was pale beneath the grime now, lips bluish from the cold night, though heat would come soon enough. She stirred weakly when he brushed the hair from her face. "Still here," Jonah muttered, half to her, half to himself. "That's something." He lifted her onto the horse again, tucking his coat tighter around her shoulders. She was no weight at all, and that troubled him more than if she'd been heavy. Flesh falling away meant she'd been starving long before he found her. The canteen thudded against his side, empty, save for the faint rattle of a drop or two clinging to the bottom. He didn't dare open it, not yet. He mounted behind her and nudged Buck forward. The horse's hooves sank into loose sand as they set out into the dawn. By mid-morning, the desert gleamed white, the sun hanging like a hammer above them. Jonah scanned the horizon with the trained eyes of a man who'd ridden more barren places than he could count. There, faint green against the flat sand. Cactus, maybe barrel cactus, swollen with bitter water. He turned the horse toward it. Sliding off, he left the woman slumped in the saddle and drew his knife. He hacked into the cactus's thick skin, letting the pulp ooze out. He cupped a handful of the bitter juice and brought it to her lips. She flinched, the taste sharp, but swallowed greedily. A trickle ran down her chin, and Jonah wiped it away with the back of his thumb. "Not much," he murmured, "but it'll keep you breathing." She blinked up at him, her eyes clearer now, if only barely. "Why, helping me?" Jonah shifted his weight, knife still dripping cactus sap. He didn't answer right away. He'd been asked that before, back when folks thought kindness was something you could afford, but he wasn't sure himself. Finally he muttered, "Because somebody should have." Her throat tightened as if she wanted to say more, but the desert stole the words before they formed. They rode on. By noon, the woman's head lolled against Jonah's chest. He counted her breaths, each one thinner than the last. Then, faintly on the wind, buzzards. Their circling shadows cut against the sky. Jonah's jaw clenched. He followed their arc, praying it wasn't over her people's bones. The horse crested a ridge, and Jonah froze. Below, a wagon, abandoned, its wheels half buried in sand, canvas torn loose, wood bleached by sun. He steered them down, wary. When they reached it, Jonah dismounted, keeping one hand on his revolver. He pulled the canvas aside and cursed under his breath. Inside lay a bundle of broken crates, spilled flour turned to paste by some long-ago rain. The stench of rot clung faint, but there were no bodies, no sign of struggle, just a wagon discarded like an empty shell. The woman's fingers twitched against the saddle horn. Her eyes opened in a flutter. She looked at the wagon, and a tremor ran through her whole frame. "Mine," she whispered. "That was ours." Jonah turned sharply. "Yours?" She nodded, weak but certain. They took the strong horses, left the rest, said I slowed them down." Her breath caught, ragged. "My own Bisul rather led them on." Jonah's hand tightened on the canvas until his knuckles whitened. He had no kin left, but he knew what it meant to be betrayed by blood. That kind of wound festered deeper than thirst. He climbed back up, settling her gently against him. "You hold on," he said low. "We'll find water yet." By evening, they reached the dry bed of a creek. Jonah crouched, digging with his hands until damp earth stained his fingers. He drove his knife deep, carving a hole until murky water seeped up. He filled the canteen, let the silt settle, then lifted it to her lips. She drank like a woman tasting salvation, though most of it spilled down her chin. When she finished, Jonah took the last mouthful for himself. It was bitter, full of grit, but it steadied his head. For the first time since he found her, color touched her cheeks. She leaned against his chest, whispering, "You gave me life." Jonah didn't answer. He just held her tighter, staring at the creek bed under the fading light. He knew tomorrow would bring more miles, more thirst, more reckoning. But for now, she lived. The creek bed held through the night. Jonah had dug the hole deeper, letting it seep enough to fill the canteen twice over. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. The woman lay wrapped in his coat near the embers of a small fire, her breathing steadier now. Jonah kept watch, his revolver resting across his lap, eyes sharp for movement in the brush. At dawn, she stirred. Her eyes, clearer than before, found his face. "You stayed awake," she whispered. Jonah shrugged. "Sleep's for men with softer lives."